there's a lot more in the Bible than just the Old Testament and Leviticus. Like it goes on later on. When Jesus came there, he pretty much came as the guy to undo all those rules that were made in the first part of the Bible. So like later on, he pretty much says to people who are sticking by those rules that are wrong, and that the only way to do it is pretty much live the way I'm doing it. So like Jesus comes later on to kind of undo the mistakes that were made in the Old Testament.
Well, the Old Testament bit kind of makes the point that I'm making is that if you take the Bible as your basis for morality, then morality is relative. It's not absolute. Because if you start off with an Old Testament in which God is, as an overview of the storyline, it says to one tribe, if you obey my commandments, I will help you kill all those people over there and take their land. That entire storyline is immoral, based on what Jesus is supposed to have said in the Bible. Now, I'll put aside a whole load of things about whether Jesus said what he's reported as having said and so on. But as an overview, if you do have a Jesus character that is arriving and saying, no, these things that God previously said are not correct, then that's an argument for relative morality rather than an argument for absolute morality. I actually think it's slightly more complicated as well, because there is no Jesus character per se in the Bible. There's a whole load of different stories written by different people about this Jesus character, which differ in emphasis. And indeed, in one of them, Jesus is saying that he will kill the children of Jezebel for the sins of their mother, which doesn't, to me, seem to be a particularly morally good viewpoint.
Did you have any reference for that last point?
Start of Revelation. And by the way, it's not before. It comes before the visionary bit. It's not part of the visions. The Jesus character is supposed to be sending messages to 7 different cities where the missionaries are having problems. And in one of them, there's a person called Jezebel, and Jesus says that he will kill Jezebel's children with death, which is a pretty impressive way to kill somebody.
Just on that point, it's worth making a sort of a logical point, I suppose, here, which, if you have a book, especially a complex book like the Bible, obviously it's going to be open to people to interpret it in different ways, and that's exactly what has happened, although there obviously are a number of very common interpretations that Christians would share. So that's historically correct. Obviously there's going to be lots of different interpretations, but the logical point is that if you have a way of interpreting that book and interpreting the tradition and so on that comes from that book, which gives you sort of a unified and coherent interpretation of what it means, then you could obviously know what it means, and you would not be stuck therefore with loads of different interpretations. Now, whether that's a fact or not is in a way, I think, you see, I didn't deal with that because I think it's irrelevant to the actual motion of tonight's debate. It makes for a very interesting topic, of course, but it is a logical point. If you have a way of interpreting it and knowing what it means, then you are no longer stuck with just guesswork or with a relative morality.
If you want to respond to that.
But in order to have that way of interpreting it, by definition, you have to impose that interpretation from outside of the texts. So you are applying your own intuitive sense of morality to the texts rather than taking your interpretation from the texts.
I don't know if that's true by definition as such, in the sense that you can have an interpreter of a text who is true to the text and who is able, in other words, to interpret what it truly has to say. And again, bear in mind we're talking about a book that is complex. It's a book which is written over centuries, several different authors, so you have development within it. You pointed out some of that yourself there. From a Christian point of view, there's nothing new in this whatsoever. Christians have from the very beginning of Christianity, going back to Christ, have made distinctions between what was in the Old Testament and what is permanent, as such, like the Ten Commandments, and then other parts which are more temporary, laws and so on, which are made for the time. It's quite possible for morality to have both kinds of things in it. Some parts are permanent and absolute, and other parts are relative and temporary. You don't have to have a morality that's all relative or all absolute. You can have a mixture. I think that possibility has been overlooked so far in the debate. So some things in the Bible are very much permanent things, like thou shalt not kill. So killing the innocent is, that's something we would all agree on here, and I made that point in my speech. Whereas some of the laws in the Old Testament that my opponents, as I knew they would, have concentrated on and emphasised, no one today has any problem with those at all, because we would regard those as being temporary laws, and they aren't relevant for us today, and therefore we're not bothered by them, and no Christian is.
Yeah, except I didn't concentrate on the Old Testament. I said that in the New Testament, Jesus is quoted as saying that he will kill the children of Jezebel with death for the sins of their parent.
What do you that means? What are these children of Jezebel?
Well, they are presumably innocent beings in terms of the sins of their mother.
No, I think you're missing. See, again, you mentioned the book of Revelation there. One of the basic rules, I suppose, of interpreting any text is to understand what kind of style it's written in, so that you don't interpret something which is written in a literal style as if it was, symbolic, or you don't interpret something that's written in a symbolic style as if it was literal. Now, it seems to me that what you're doing here, and this is what threw me first of all, is that you're interpreting something which is notoriously symbolic in a sense. It's known to be one of the most difficult books to interpret in the whole Bible, written in a style of writing that existed just for a couple of hundred years back at the time of Christ. In which it's necessary to have the very best of scholarship as well as the very best of tradition and church interpretation to avoid going wrong. And you've taken something out of context and are interpreting it as if it was literally about children being killed, when in fact no modern reader of it who knows this book and who understands it and who's aware of these kind of problems, let's say, these kind of challenges, no one is ever going to fall into that unless they want to try and use it as a kind of a debating point to kind of win a debate or to try and confuse an audience. No one amongst Christians would ever believe that Jesus is talking about literally killing innocent children. No one does. It's simply a fact. No one does, really. It's a complete misinterpretation, and there's no way of backing it up in any kind of historical or literary or theological kind of back and forth. The Bible can be misinterpreted, certainly, but this is certainly the first time I've heard that one. And it's so outlandish, it's no wonder I haven't heard it before.
I think we might go to another question if you can object. Anybody else?